Okay.
And we are. Good evening. Welcome. This is the After Hours Show. I'm Joe in Norway. It's the 40th episode we're doing, and I'm joined by Anne Lee, a retired college professor and community member at the Daily Kos. She's a member of the National Council of Independent Scholars and is a contributor to the book, The Political Economy of Art, Making the Nation of Culture. Evening, Anne.
Hey there, Joe. What's for supper?
Well, let me get ready here. Let's see. So, the past couple of weeks, I was in Spain in the autonomous region of Valencia, and I came across a dish that I was struggling to understand what it was on the menu because in Valencia they speak Valenciano, and the translation, I know a bit of Spanish, but not much Valenciano. And Coques de Dasca sounds like a croquette of some sort, and that's how it was described. But it turned out that it's essentially a tortilla, an ancient tortilla recipe. And I could just show you for those who might not know the region I'm talking about. You see the map all right here?
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, so Spain is divided into autonomous regions, and Valencia is on the east coast. It has this kind of microclimate created by the Balearic Islands that has one of the mildest winters in Europe. But we were around the southern, oh, my mouse is southern tip here. And in this region, in the Marina Alta, the mountainous region off the coast of Costa Blanca, and Al Safor. This region was known for creating these tortillas. Or not, I can't say tortillas. They're not tortillas. All right, they're cocas or cocos. There are so many different ways to spell it and pronounce it, and everybody apparently has their own recipe. It's probably one of the most complicated tortilla recipes I've come across, aside from making tortilla masa dough from scratch. But it's actually a mixture of white flour and corn flour. I've got some Mexican nixtamalized tortilla flour that I'll be using, so it'll go a little quicker than cooking with straight cornmeal or corn flour. So apparently, reading the history, it's hard. There's not many recipes online, and it's all in Valencia. And if there is anything in English or in Valenciano, they have conflicting histories on the whole dish. But essentially, they say it started around the 13th century in the Moorish era, could be earlier. Had some say it was originally with wheat, but when they brought back maize from the New World, they substituted, they mixed maize in with the wheat because there would always be wheat shortages. So the cornmeal, because they could grow corn in the region, so they substituted corn with the wheat, and they found that it created this great texture for the tortillas. And it was a special texture because it's essentially a cooked corn cake, but it reminded me of paratha, like Southeast Asian paratha. But so essentially, I'm making tortillas, and there's a number of toppings. It's like a Valencian taco, and the one I had was, or the traditional one that we had, was chopped roasted eggplant and roasted pepper with chopped egg, hard boiled egg, and an oil cured anchovy. But since we're all 100% vegetarian on this show, I was trying to come up with some ideas for egg alternative and salty, oily, fishy umami bomb of anchovy. The eggs, I'll be using this is soaked mung dal that I've ground. And it's like the dish we've made, the Indian dish chila. Hopefully we'll do it on the skillet here, and hopefully it won't stick, and we'll get this gelatinous substance. I added a bit of the volcanic black salt, so that gives it that sulfuric eggy flavor. And the trick for substituting the anchovies are Chinese fermented black beans. So these have the salty, the umami, and fermentation sort of fermentation flavor you get with the anchovies. This is a decent substitute, and it's a callback to the corn that comes from the other side of the planet. So I'm going to get cracking on this, and we'll see how it goes. This is a total experiment. I haven't made it before. I've tried to ask people how to make it when I was in Valencia, and most people didn't know what the hell I was talking about. What is this dish?
Secret.
It's kind of lost. It's only the old aunts and abuelas have the recipe, and it might be dying out. Hopefully not, but we'll see. Should turn out good.
Darn abuelas. All right, looking forward to it. Been a busy week this week. All kinds of crazy crap going on. Let's
Anything
see.
positive?
I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, the delay tactics in the domestic scene for previous guy, that is Trump, are quite amazing. You know, they're just throwing up all this chaff in order to stop the prosecution. Today they announced the exact number comes down to 454 million and change. It comes down to 0.05 cents, 454 million, et cetera, and 5 cents. So that's what he owes. And somebody's going to guarantee it, I'm sure. You know, some other rich person who will probably get favors of some kind in a Trump administration will come up with the dough. Of course, it'll be laundered in a variety of ways, but that's kind of how things go. Today was a sanctions day, a 500 new sanctions on the Russians, partially because I think we're just in the third year of the war in Ukraine. But apparently, it's going to be possible to seize some of the frozen assets of Russia and they're kind of going to be, well, you could call it laundering. I think when governments do it, it's not called laundering, but anyway, it's going through Estonia, I think, or something. So some of the seized assets, I think, are eventually going to reach Ukraine or reach debtors of Ukraine or whatever. The Ukraine economy is a war economy at the present moment, but private capital actually made a little bit of money in the last year or so. So it's actually going to be relatively in decent shape in a post-Ukrainian economy, aside from the fact that farm vehicles get blown up in all of this war. And the Polish farmers who are pro-Russian have been screwing with the border transport of material, or actually commodities. And so there's been a blockade on certain routes between Poland and Ukraine, and so that's been an issue. And it is, I think, fomented by pro-Russian folks. There are pro-Russian folks everywhere, even in the United States Congress, which, as a matter of reflection, the GOP is still carrying on with insisting that the guy who they rearrested, I think yesterday, who apparently, even though he was a confidential informer for about 10 years, apparently was getting all his information, or the most recent information, from Russian military intelligence. So and despite that, the GOP is just holding on, insisting that they're going to continue with the impeachment of Joe Biden for apparently no evidence and no reason, but they're serving the master, the large super mango with a tiny accordion hands. They're still insisting that there's some truth there, but seems less. Jamie Raskin, one of the members on the Oversight Committee, declared the impeachment is kaput, but that's it. They're not quite back at work yet, so that we'll see what happens. Approving the money of the $60 billion for $60+ billion for Ukraine hasn't yet happened. They're hoping that it will happen once everyone comes back. It seems to me that there's going to be a deal. There has to be a deal because, as CBS pointed out this past week, that budget package affects not only weapons procurement and materiel, but it also affects the budget of U.S. troops abroad. So it affects a lot of major bases that and unfortunately, the U.S. has base as part of being a hegemon. You've got bases everywhere. And so the budgets for those bases are at risk just simply because of the way the budgets are set up. And it's fairly complicated, as all things are in government, but that's coming up. So there's a lot of pressure on both ends to do those sorts of things. I would assert that, and just to give you a quick look at the map, well, that's not so big, but needless to say, the battle area hasn't changed that much. The Ukrainians gave up a little bit of land in Avdiivka. They, well, you could say they withdrew, but I think several hundred Ukrainians got caught, taken prisoner, and of course the usual atrocities apply. A significant Ukrainian Milla blogger, that is someone who's a member of the military, who does social media reporting, usually on places like Telegram, committed suicide, or they say he committed suicide. I think they could all be disinformation, but I think he's dead. And he was fairly prominent, and he was a critic of how there were all those meat assaults, that is, mass assaults of prisoners and a variety of other folks in the eastern Ukraine region during the battles where the Russians lost certain areas, and they've regained some areas. Of course, Avdiivka seems to be a major acquisition or reacquisition for the Russians, simply because it's on the main road to Donetsk, and that may be true, but essentially they've lost a couple kilometers of battle line and a lot of destroyed buildings and cities. I mean, there were only 800 people left in the city of 32,000, and pretty much all that bombardment has taken out most of the buildings, and so it's really a mess. But I think it's an important symbolic victory for the Russians, since the election is coming up. A variety of other matters are at work. Everyone's got to find the news where they can get it. This evening, in the last couple hours, and in fact, I only think there are 2 or 3 left of the large 4-engine A50 AWACS planes. They're they have a big dish on top and stuff. It's a really large. It's about the same size, I think, as an American C-17, and the darn thing got blown out of the air by a Patriot missile. So it's the second one that may have been claimed by a Patriot missile. And one of the reasons why it got nailed, I think, is because of the way Patriot missiles seek their targets and are difficult to jam and defeat. And I think that's an advantage. You're just, there aren't enough Patriot missiles to go around, and they are saving them up to protect things like Kyiv, the capital, etc. So, but an A-50 got knocked off over the Sea of Azov. That's in the south, across from Mariupol, but over Russian territory. So they did pull back the flight pattern from the last time they got blown out of the air, which was directly over the middle of the Sea of Azov. And so they were just cruising around over Russian territory, and they got nailed. There was another, and this hasn't been confirmed yet, but an associated IL-22, 4-engine turboprop along the same lines as the American P3, I think, is got a hit and taken out of the air as well. So the last time an A-50 got taken out, it included a couple of high-ranking officers. There was at least one general, I think, and I guess because they assumed no one was going to attack their advanced electronic weapons platforms. These planes are really important, and they don't have very many of them left. I think they built 12 originally, and a bunch of them are not serviceable. And in terms of covering the nation, as it were, they only had 4 or 5, and now they're down to maybe 3. So this will have an effect. It's not to say that there aren't other platforms that will account for electronic warfare, but what accompanies this, of course, is what the Russians have spent a fair amount of time doing, and is developing jamming technologies, which have had a slight effect. It could be said that this will be a good thing, as it were, because they will have more difficulty managing their air assets. And perhaps they have had trouble with that, considering that in the past week or so, they've knocked down about 4 or 5 intermediate-sized fighter bombers of the Russians have lost Su-34s and 35s, several of them, and that, I don't know if it's a sign because of the issues with these large AWACS planes, but something is changing. After the loss of Avdiivka, the people who are running the cyber warfare division of the Ukrainian military promised that there would be a surprise coming up. I don't know if this knocking down the A-50 was a surprise, but it did seem like a surprise to knock a second one down that they had. The Russians sort of thought they could defend against it, but obviously they couldn't. So that's kind of what happened recently. There, in the past week, more stuff got blown up, and then the usual things apply. Apparently they had grouped a bunch of new recruits or reservists into one area for some sort of ceremony or orientation with one of the major generals of the Russian army. And apparently the Ukrainians decided, for whatever reason, they knew this was happening, and they dropped a bunch of HIMARS missiles on them. And I think a fair number of people got killed. It was, and they had good reconnaissance on it, so you can actually watch the thing, the event happen. They dropped about 4 or 5 of them on them, and there is post-event video with a lot of dead bodies lined up. I think you can search for yourself, but it is quite grisly. The whole issue of people, if you're into that sort of thing, there's just a lot of imagery of people being wiped out by drones or a whole variety of other little ordnance, and it's very sad. Another 1,200 or 1,100 casualties. It's ramping up. The death toll, as it were, I think is somewhere around, and this is of course general thing, it's about 70,000 Russian deaths occurred. The Ukrainian deaths are not quite as high. Probably the Russians have lost twice as many in terms of people killed in action. Plenty of casualties otherwise, which comes up to, if you add everything together, about 500,000 casualties from this war alone. And then, other than arguing about training and providing material and stuff, things still happen. How are those going?
Oh, they're
Joe?
doing well. These are, am I on mic? Yeah. Yeah, so the mung dal cakes are doing well. They're almost done. You have to be sure to cook them long enough so that they are cooked through, so you're not eating raw beans. But they should have a nice texture. Yep.
Are you going to be able to fold them? Is that a fold?
Oh no, I'm going to dice these up as if they're hard cooked egg.
Ah. Okay.
But one thing that's curious about this recipe is that you boil the water with onion. So once the onion has gotten sufficiently cooked through, you pour in the flours. Well, yeah, it was a very involved recipe. I was like, what? It can't be. It doesn't need to be this difficult, does it? They say, all right, cook the flour, mix it in the heat, then transfer it to a bain marie. You have to keep you have to keep the dough warm. So we're hoping we got the correct water to flour ratio.
Let's hope so. Okie dokie. Well, let me get back to finishing off with Ukraine here. I suppose the war continues. We're beginning, tomorrow will be the anniversary of the commencement of the invasion. So the 3rd year of the war in Ukraine will start tomorrow. A lot of other things happened, of course, on this date. It's an anniversary of Malcolm X 2 days ago being assassinated. A variety of other things have happened in the world, of course, in history. So it's, for some reason, I think the attack began on a Russian commemorative day for soldiers. There's some Russian Commemorative Day. There are a heck of a lot of them, and so that's also what this is why they commenced the attack on the day they did. Low those 2 years ago. So it is tiring for those of us who are on day 730, which is a little scary considering how long we've been doing this. Day 732 actually is tomorrow, which has already begun in the Ukrainian time zone. And the latest news is that this to remind us, the Institute for the Study of War reminds us that the southern tip of Transnistria, which is the breakaway Russian republic, so-called area of Moldova, is they're starting to talk about this again. There's another little. It's only 20 or 30% Russian, but it does have a sort of clique that is running the place, and it does have a modest little army, modest being like a brigade-sized unit. I think they still have, with respect, biplanes, and a couple of really beat-up helicopters. So they're it's not
So
like
they're enthusiasts.
They're pretty much there's a lot of noise but very little substance, but there's a worry that because the southern tip of the Transnistria is only 50 or 60 kilometers from Odessa, that some noise, it is that fairly close and on the southern side, and the original planning goal of the Novorussa whatever invasion was to be able to seize all of the parts of Ukraine that were on the Black Sea. So it would complete a kind of full encirclement if the Russians could seize Odessa, for example. And they're trying to destabilize Moldova. And so, all of these things are going on. It's the usual kind of international political problems. I assume that there's a lot of other kinds of special op work and et cetera going on in these places, and that they probably have a lot of territorial defense troops sort of near Transnistria, or at least near the accessible areas, is a slightly mountainous area anyway. So that's kind of what's going on. There was a commemorative relative to the number of Black Sea Fleet ships that have been sunk. The Russians have lost more ships than the Ukrainians, but the Ukrainians didn't have much of a navy. The Russians are a little bit more hesitant about sending ships out anywhere these days, considering that the Ukrainians are sending naval drones after these ships, and the defense against them is not very good. This is that jamming thing again, whether Russian technology to jam electronic transmission is very good, particularly since the Ukrainians have figured out how to beat that, particularly with fairly large explosive maintaining devices. On the other hand, if you look at various parts of the battlefield, there's it's plus and minus. Losing Avdiivka also meant that there's other Russian advances in other directions. So overall, the Russians have gained a slight bit of territory, but Ukrainians are fighting them off, and so that's kind of where we are. It's not really a stalemate. It's just simply everyone's. There's a lot of little battles, and little meaning that a lot of people involved, but a lot of dangerous stuff involved as well, with the occasional Ukrainian attack on things very far behind the Russian lines. So that's happening. There's the increased worry of a Russian attack, an advance through Belarus to attack Baltic states, but the second that happens, Article 5 will, the NATO Article 5 will kick in, and it's going to get pretty ugly. So I don't think that's really going to happen, even though admitting Finland into NATO increases the battle line about 800 kilometers. So it is a lot of moving parts in this particular problem. So let me jump ahead and start talking about what I was going to rant about. And what I'm going to rant about is continuing decline.
Before you, would you
Oh,
mind if I kick in here
oh,
for a minute?
oh, please.
So I got the dough made. It's kind of gluey, sticky. You can see the texture here. Feels like cooked dough. You just as soon as you're able to touch it, I keep it in the bain marie just so it stays warm. Just make a golf ball size or so, roll it, and then we're gonna press them into tortillas very shortly. I'm gonna get them
Nice.
on the grill. We're almost done.
Okay. Okie dokie. I'm hungry again. Darn it. Trump has been doubling down on immunity, trying to slow up the legal process, which may or may not happen depending on how competent the Florida judge Eileen Cannon is. She's already stepped in it a couple of times, and there may be an attempt to get her to be lifted from the trial, but that remains to be seen. It simply is that they're bombarding a whole bunch of motions to try and slow up the trial with assertions of presidential immunity, which is, with respect, not applicable in this particular context because Citizen Trump was committed. The crimes in this case were committed after he was president. So essentially, they're reinforcing the presidential immunity argument. Some speculate because they're hoping for a positive sign from SCOTUS, the Supreme Court, on the DC immunity appeal, even though the Court of Appeals said it was all pretty much a BS and made it pretty much bulletproof at the appellate level. But these are all delays, and this will be interesting simply because at some moment these things collide. So the assertion by Glenn Kirshner at MSNBC was that if Eileen Cannon moves the May date for the trial in Florida, it becomes open then for the insertion of the DC court date. So at some moment, they're just not going to be able. They've painted themselves into a kind of legal corner. But we'll know eventually. The problem is there's crime. There really is crime. And it really is like there's evidence, unlike certain other things going on, and which are largely disinformation or diversion campaigns. So that's kind of what's going on there. CBS seized confidential files of a reporter that got laid off or fired in a bunch of CBS and Paramount, I think Paramount firings, and Catherine Herridge, who tended to have a much more conservative bent on what she was doing in her stories, having worked for Fox News for a couple of years. The interesting thing, of course, is that General Michael Flynn tweeted a regret that she got fired, which I don't know if that'll say anything. Of course, Flynn, who may or may not be Q of QAnon, maybe just throwing up a little smoke. But apparently, Herridge was working on the Hunter Biden laptop story. The thing was that CBS seized all of her confidential files, all the office notes and stuff like that. Now, the question is, legally, what's going on? She filed a complaint via SAG-AFTRA, which is sort of a middling complaint, but it does seem, and so there's something's going on there. We don't know quite what it is because she was involved in a First Amendment sources issue on a story that she did for Fox before she came to CBS. So anyway, I know that sounds like inside baseball, but it is these questions of sources and files and other things that are part of the story. Recall that the Durham investigation in the from the post-Mueller Mueller inquiry lasted forever, partially because of questions of confidential files and sources. The Conservative Political Action Conference is going on right now, and it's a kind of celebrity apprentice for the GOP vice presidential short list. Trump admitted what he had on his short list, and it includes kind of the usual suspects. Senator Scott of South Carolina. He even included on his short list Ron DeSantis. So, you know, I don't know how serious a set of things are, because recall that the vice president is, as they say, a heartbeat away, and I'm not quite sure he wants that or Vivek Ramaswamy being a heartbeat away. I think some of us would have issues with that. Needless to say, Nikki Haley is not one of those on the list, but what's her name? Kristi Noem, the governor of South Dakota, is on it. And just to throw it in there to make us all confused, is former Democratic, maybe she's still a Democrat, former Congressperson, Congressional Representative Tulsi Gabbard is on that short list, which I think you know, is there for a variety of reasons. I think one of the reasons is, of course, it would be amusing, as we might think, that she would be the Secretary of Defense in a Trump administration, which would be scary at best. So that's it's all celebrity apprentice. And as one of the usual right-wing nutters said in his session at CPAC, welcome to the end of democracy. Note, of course, that this is just false equivalence at work, and the mainstream media is doing that. So Philip Bump, who does a lot of stat-type stuff, quant work at the Washington Post, put up a thing that shows, there was a bit of polling that showed that Americans feel, well, the tagline or the headline is that Americans feel less hostile to Trump. Well, that's not true. It just means that certain parties are see Trump in a less unfavorable way, but this is kind of a double negative. You know, it means that people, and my interpretation of it is essentially that we're all sort of frozen in our particular hatred. And it's just that we're trying to move on, you know. I mean, you know, we're not any more angry. We're just still angry, and that that a lot of Democrats are going to vote against Trump. Now, what the mainstream media is playing with, and it just is very sad when they do this, but they still are doing this. They put on some folks who are very Afrocentric, and they try to show in a very New York Times in the Midwestern diner sort of way that there is some portion of Black, especially males, who are going to vote for Trump. Now, I think it's a very small number, and it has other things. It has accelerationist components to it, it has reactionary components. It's about a whole bunch of other things, but you know, it's an interesting point of view, but I think overemphasized. But it is, as I refer to, as a kind of rhetorical racketeering, is that you try and, you know, get these sort of sub-audiences to make a noise. And even though the relative size is pretty small, but as we know, we're coming up with an election because of the Electoral College. We're going to have swing state effects. And considering that the last election, despite the 7 or 8 million more people who voted for Biden, the real vote came to a difference of about 150 to 200,000 because of the swing states. And then a new thing came up yesterday that suggests that the current Republican Congress could put a monkey wrench even before the Electoral College votes are counted. So in other words, the last attempt on January 6th to attack it from the podium, that to attack it from the Speaker of the House or the Vice President side of the operation. Instead, there will be attempts to decertify state-level votes with the collusion, of course, by dominant GOP legislators and governors and attorney generals. There's a whole bunch of folks who can actually throw monkey wrenches at this thing. So it's going to be, could be chaos. Not that, we're running around with our heads cut off. And I assume that the Democrats have a plan for this. I truly hope there is a plan for this, because this has been mentioned. I mean, the fact that what January 6th showed was that there is this logic that says that you can make stuff up that goes back to 1887 or even 1877 that can affect a current election. So this is terrible. And then there's all the PR related stuff, Trump claimed that the civil fraud judgment of $454 million against him was a form of Navalny. That is, he said that Alexei Navalny, that he was just like him. Well, I suppose, and if this means that Trump is willing to have him locked outside of a stockade for a couple of hours in minus 30 degrees temperature, yeah, I'll go for it. Whatever.
Send them to Minnesota.
Send them to Minnesota, exactly. So, and they screwed themselves again, of course. But it's a little, it's only a blip, Tommy Tuberville or Tuberville. Is it a town of potatoes or something? Anyway, War Eagle himself, Senator Tuberville, was confronted by a reporter who asked him about the recent decision by the Alabama State Supreme Court to stop in vitro fertilization, which has shut down all operations of such clinics in the state of Alabama. What he thought about that, and then he was totally confused. He didn't understand what in vitro fertilization was, apparently, and sort of said, well, we need more people. We need to, we need to produce more children. And that wasn't quite, because he was in favor of shutting down the IVF clinics, that the rationale made no sense, And in the middle of his little conversation with the reporter, he tried to back out of it, but he just wound up being even more stupid than he always. He's just an amazing. He doesn't know what he's doing. He truly doesn't know what he's doing, and occasionally he pumps out Russian talking points, which is even more interesting from another point of view. Anyway, Trump tried to cover that up in the latest speech. I think it's a South Carolina speech where he says that he's in favor of IVF, which doesn't mean that he hates Alabama, but this was a kind of attempt to deflect from that so that he could spin it in the direction of family values and in favor of Alabama, a state that has a tendency to try to put the Ten Commandment everywhere in public buildings. So, there's that stuff going on. And it's even worse. You can see how crazy it could get. The Mercedes plant in Alabama is anti-union, needless to say. And, is that going to mean, and, southern states are where a lot of European car makers do have their factories, or anyway, international car companies have their factories. I think it's BMWs in South Carolina, et cetera. So these are going to be issues, I think, in the future, if nothing else. But to go back to the Alabama issue, the original thing that happened was a suit built around somebody walked into a patient, quote unquote, ran into a place where they were storing frozen embryos and threw them on the floor. And so there's a whole thing about, lawsuits about this, and what kind of prosecution that was. So you can see that it was spun in a certain direction about whether, popsicles have life or personhood. Personhood popsicles are important. So this is, and it's not the first time that this has happened. And people have predicted that IVF, in vitro fertilization, would be the next step after Dobbs. That you wouldn't just simply be talking about abortion, but you would be talking about in vitro fertilization, which is not the same thing. And what does it privilege? But, certain people who can afford the procedures, number one. Number two, trying to push it is just simply, attacking women. It's just the war on women continues. So anyway, Nikki Haley continues. She says she's going to stay in the race. People have given her money. Trump is making statements or speeches where he doesn't quite know what he's saying. Tonight's little thing that I'm going to put out probably soon after this, we'll talk about whether Trump was thinking about the song Once, Twice, Three Times a Lady, and whether he was thinking of Conway Twitty's lyrics or the Commodores when he was referring to something. It really is unclear what he's doing these things in his speeches that make no damn sense. And the mainstream media is not pointing these crazy things out. After all, the night before last, he said that Israel is the capital of Israel, which, well, in a metaphorical way, I suppose. But, he was in effect talking about Jerusalem and moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. But he, it's another little short that was going on in his little brain. This is going on again, as previous guy, that is Mango Mussolini, is still at the bottom of American greatness polling of academics, talking about the poll of who was a good president or not. It's pretty clear that Abraham Lincoln is number one, but it is always interesting, of course, and this is a typical rhetorical strategy of the giant Mango, and that what he does is he uses by association, this is that whole business that a good defense in some ways is a kind of associative maneuver, so that in mentioning Abraham Lincoln, or that he's better than Abraham Lincoln, that this would deflect from the fact that he's at the total opposite end of the spectrum of great presidents from Abraham Lincoln. Aside from the fact that by associating himself with Abraham Lincoln, he's being very positive. This is why he's he claims, the best president for African Americans. Now, it's clear also, though, now that the only chance that he has of avoiding prison at some moment is to become president of the United States for a second term and essentially cut off most of the prosecutions. The reality, of course, is that despite the fact that they tried last week to discredit on a conflict of interest, the prosecutor in the Georgia case, the RICO case, which failed miserably, although it did tell us something about, how much money you, if you're African American, you keep a larger cash reserve only because people will screw with you administratively, or you don't trust the banking system because at some moment you could get between a rock and a hard place and not have enough liquidity. In another speech, this is 2 weeks ago, Trump claimed that he beat Joe Biden in 2016. And then he made up some bizarre thing about secure paper, and because he's clueless. These things in his speeches are just weird. So that's kind of what goes on. I'm now hungry again, Joe.
Oh boy. Well, you're in luck. We've got it worked out. They're a bit softer than corn. The recipe is 200 grams wheat flour, 100 grams corn flour, sorry. and a shallot, boiled shallot, salt, and olive oil. And then we put them on the griddle. I assembled the roasted eggplant, the chila or the moonlet. Got a little too crispy maybe, and roasted paprika.
Nancy asked a question of whether it tastes good or not.
Well, we'll have to find out in the post show. But I mean, they sure look like tacos to me. So
yes,
somewhat of a traditional dish from eastern Valencia region of La Safor and La Marina Alta. Coques de Dasca.
I'm hungry again, damn it.
Lovely griddle. This thing works like a beast. This is a workhorse from the 1940s.
Indeed.
Don't make them like that anymore.
You can do crepes on that thing, can't you?
Yep.
Nice. I'm hungry again, damn it.
Well, did we have any other questions from the audience out there?
Folks? Anyone? No, they've been all bludgeoned into silence.
So we've got Twilight Zone coming up later.
Indeed. Twilight Zone is coming up. I think John is in good spirits. I don't know if he's here for teasing the Twilight Zone, which is coming up in 40 minutes from now.
I am here.
Right. What's up for tonight?
Tonight we have an episode from season 4 of the Twilight Zone, the last appearance of Burgess Meredith in the original Twilight Zone.
The Penguin.
The Penguin, indeed. And you'll see actually in this pre-Penguin performance, I think you'll see some of the some hints of the Penguin and mannerisms and yes, I think the Penguin smoked a cigarette, right?
With a
long cigarette.
With a holder.
Yeah.
Well, this guy smokes a cigar in a very odd fashion, so there's a little carryover, I think.
There we go. Indeed.
Yeah, it's a good one.
People should join us in our Zoom area, the autonomouscollective.net. We're trying to do better at this. People like me are. I think this weekend is Valley Vox. I think we're going to have Valley Vox.
Before that, we've got Harsh as well. He's
yes,
showing a third episode of. Is Harsh around? Did he want to speak up about it?
Sure.
Discovery of India.
Discovery. 3. Yeah, third episode. So yeah, this was again like 2000 years ago. We have Vedic people, so basically immigrants coming from the north, bringing in their culture. The difference is they sort of became the dominant culture, and how the Hinduism came from their culture actually. So that's pretty interesting. Like they were not natives essentially, but how they mixed with the native folks and how their culture turned into a religion, which we are practicing now.
Well, I have a question for Harsh.
Mm-hmm.
Did India exist before some white guy discovered it?
That's a trick question.
Oh, darn colonialism.
So that, and then tomorrow we've got Nancy's writing reading workshop, followed by Valley Vox.
Indeed.
I'm not sure what is going on in Valley Vox. Oh, it was a Valentine's.
Oh, yes. I think that's
special,
what it is.
but then it changed. I think. Hold on a minute. Let me find it. Game plan. in Pacamona. It looks like for anyone in the CA29 area, Angelica
yes.
will be with us tomorrow, sharing some pretty disturbing stuff with us. Here's the belly box link. Yeah. So is this a person running for office in
Yeah.
Los Angeles?
Yes, lots of sausage making in the Southern California relative to, political office. Going to be
Not very kosher.
not very kosher. Lots of crazy crap going on. So Weekly Marks will be at with lecture 5 of Andrew Higginbottom about Marx's Das Kapital, and so that will be there. And then after that, Columbo. John, do you want to speak a little bit about Columbo on Sunday?
Yes, indeed. A very good Columbo episode from the early 1990s, guest starring and directed by Patrick McGowan.
Ooh, number 6.
Is he in Star Trek?
No, he was not in
Number
Star
6. He's number 6.
He was in The Prisoner.
Danger Man.
Danger Man.
Danger Man. John
And
Well.
Edward the Longshanks.
Indeed. Time to go.
He was also in the same epic Life for Ruth, John. You keep forgetting this.
Oh, yes. What's it called?
Life for Ruth.
For Ruth. Yes.
Ruth. And it's a very good film.
I haven't seen it yet. That's why I keep slipping my mind.
The budget was about £50,000, so it's very character based.
Low budget.
Yes.
Come visit us. Come to our site. Join our Discord. Come see us on Zoom. We won't bite much.
You'll have fun.
AutonomousCollective.net. That's been our show. See ya.
Bye. See you next week. Bye.